different. We went immediately from a recession down to a depression because the government forced it. The government shut down the economy cold, and that is what it brought an end to all economic activity. It was just absolutely minimal. We were all locked down, and the economy plunged into depression levels. Now, this is what has to happen. When you talk to any physician, when you have a client or when you have a patient who is in extremis, has massive infections, and if you try to do anything, they'll probably die. So what do? They put them into a state of coma and start administering tremendous amount of antibiotics, and then very slowly take them off and slowly wake them up. If you give them any kind of stimulus or amphetamines during that period of time or whatever, you'll kill them. And the government knew that what they had to do was to shut down the economy, put it into a coma until they figured out what can we do about this. Unfortunately, what did it was a disease. And what can we do about it? We don't know. We had never dealt with this particular one before, and we were totally unprepared for it. To make matters worse, we were 3 months late in coming to the party at all, because some people in the government were afraid of offending anybody and not wanting to alarm anybody. So as a consequence, we started doing something about it 3 months later, and it was already a catastrophe. So the shutdown was in place, has been longer than it would have been had we been on top of this. But what the government giveth, the government has to take away. And it is their responsibility to get us out of this, because they're the ones who engineered it. They're the ones who can take us out. This is entirely different. Nobody's fault, and nobody should be paying for it. Now, if you take a look from a practical standpoint, this massive $3 trillion infusion into the economy was absolutely necessary. But once again, when you do anything immediately without examining the consequences or where it's going, about $2 trillion of that was flushed down the toilet. It went to people who did not deserve it, did not need it. It went to industries that never should have gotten it. You know, why in the world should a cruise ship get bailed out of bankruptcy? Why should an airline? Airlines go bankrupt every single recession that you have. They always take on too much debt. Next recession, they were going to go bankrupt anyway. So, I mean, there was just money. They were standing there, well, pretty much like it happened in Iran. They flew in helicopters in Iran, and they had giant, giant platforms full of money wrapped in cellophane, shoved it out the door, and started just helicoptering it around. Billions of dollars were lost in Iran for no good reason. And in Afghanistan, that's what happens when you just throw money at a problem. It's hugely inefficient. We do need more, though, because the people who needed support, not stimulus, have not gotten it. And now they're coming really to very difficult circumstances. Everybody who happens to be what they call essential services, in other words, you do the work because I'm not going to do it. Essential services, groceries, everybody who's in retail, everybody who's doing services, you know, maintenance, cleanup, you name it. These are the people who are the lowest paid in the United States. The economy will not operate around, without them. It's a service economy, and those are the people who desperately need this. And they need it for one of the very basic things, rent, because they're also not homeowners for the most part. That money ran out last month. They had a little bit of savings to take them through August. September was a real crunch month, and now we're into desperation here. So this money, regardless of who gets it out, is going to have to go immediately to them. $1 trillion will do it if it's spent effectively. And no, we're going to the goodies to the people who did not need it this time around. So the government giveth us the disaster and will take it away. The good news is, and you may have seen it in the paper today, Pfizer has a drug that looks like it's going to work, 90% efficacy. Wonderful. The only problem with that is deliverability. I'm sure those of you in the medical field know that what they have to do is keep this at super freezing levels. So, you know, when you're transporting it around, you have to have nitrogen all over the place. Oh, wait. Nitrogen everywhere across the United States, in all of Africa, all of Europe, everywhere you go, you have nitrogen keeping it cold. There's a slight problem with that, and you need 2 doses. The amount or the number of people who will get vaccinated is going to be at the margin. And you will start out with 1 round of people getting vaccinated, but getting them back for the second one has always been a problem. They learned that with polio. You needed 2 vaccines, 1 and the refresher. The same way with anybody who's gotten shingles. You have to have 2. A lot of people forget and go back to it. So there's that problem. The other good news, though, is that a number of companies are working on this, and maybe they won't be as effective as this particular one, but you're probably going to be seeing a lot of them that phase 1 trials basically say that it can't hurt you. Okay, swell. Efficacy is another problem. So if they make it through phase 2 and into trials in 3, you'll get some that may not be as effective, but we'll be getting them out there. So this will be an important thing. This may be the one thing that will save us, because the problem here right now is we can't do anything until we put a stop to COVID. You can have economics from here to eternity. Nothing is going to work until we solve this problem with COVID, because the economies cannot recover while everybody is sequestered, is what it comes down to. Is a huge, huge problem. Now, there actually has been some good news out of this, and that is COVID has accelerated changes in the economy that were coming along slowly. And one of them, no surprise to anybody else, is technology. Working from home was already coming in place. And you saw the announcements. You had everybody in the West Coast, from Google to Facebook to Twitter. You're going to work from home. I don't care if your home's in Utah or if it's in Iowa City, Iowa. You know, you're going to go home and work from home, and it's going to be quite effective. Thank you. They will be giving pay cuts because the cost of living problems that they had out in the West Coast are no longer there in the rest of the United States. So this remote learning and the remote working actually is going to be a real positive thing, especially for productivity. On the education side, don't get me started. My daughter's an educator, my husband is. There's nothing good out there yet. Other than the University of New Hampshire, I don't think anybody in the world is prepared for remote learning. So, you know, at this point in time, it's still learning how to do it and do it effectively. And I don't envy any educators out here right now, because that is going to be a huge, huge problem. So bottom line is the economy is recovering very, very slowly. It's not going to get back to normal for several years, because a lot of these jobs have been permanently lost now. It's going to be a rebuilding process. The life's blood of the American economy has always been entrepreneurs, not major corporations. It has been the entrepreneurs. But those are also the first to die whenever there's a recession, because they're the venture takers. They're the ones who go out there and start creating jobs. It's a dangerous business. They try it, and when they make it, it's absolutely wonderful. But right now, they're on the chopping block, and those companies have been definitely lost for good. So it's going to be a very, very slow slog back. So you're looking at growth in the economy that's going to be fits and starts. The bull market is going to have a lot of fits and starts as well. One of the biggest problems with this particular bull market is there are very few individuals in it now. Most of the trading that occurs on the New York Stock Exchange is off the exchange, and it's done by computers. It's called flash trading. Millions of shares trade in a fraction of a second, taking advantages of fractions of a cent movement in stocks. It's susceptible to artificial intelligence, which is scanning news media continuously, anything on radio, television, and on the internet that even gives a hint as to where something is going for a stock, for the economy, for whatever it is. Accurate or not, it reacts. So you get these big, huge swings in the market for no other reason other than computers sold, bought, sold, bought. Near Wall Street right now, there are very, very large warehouses just within, less than a half block away from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. You don't even have lights on in there, because they're just computers running away, clicking away, doing all the trading. So you have trading that is untouched by human hands, and that's giving us tremendous volatility in the market. It's a whole new world out there, but right at this point in time, the bull market is still going to continue, but it's definitely going to be a stroll, not a moving on ahead. It's going to be very, very slow. Interest rates are going to stay down here next to zero. In fact, if you're in Europe, they're negative. If you lend that bank $100, they're going to pay you back 98. Ooh, such a deal. Give me more of that. What it really comes down to is, will this happen here in the United States? When you have negative interest rates, there's no shot at anybody investing or going out there and giving you a bond to assist you to buy something or to expand your business. No, it is basically throwing in the towel as to where the economy is going. Not likely to happen here in the United States. Things would have to be so dire that the Federal Reserve would actually succumb to that. but we're going to go daggum near to zero, and we're close to there right now. So we're going to be in an environment here of very slow growth. We have very low interest rates, but we can still move on ahead. It's dependent upon COVID. Now, here's the good news about the environment. It does very well when you're in the ditch. Why? Because we're not using it. You've seen the stuff in the news about how the skies have been clearing. Even the lagoons in Venice were clear, and people are absolutely shocked. When there's no economic activity, nature has a way of trying to rebalance and correct. It's a long ways from it, but at least it shows you what happens when you stop doing the damage. And my whole argument, and I'll just jump immediately to the end and say, it's too late to reverse this, but we can stop making it worse. And that's what we need to do. Let's go with the next one.
Well, there.
Aha. The world is a dangerous place to live, not because the people are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. We're coming in a period of time, or coming off a period of time, and I want to say it's kind of a generational thing. It's with great pride. I admit that I was a 60s activist. I was in every protest that ever came around, and it's with great pride that I tell you that my grandchildren have picked up the pitchforks and the torches as well. Somewhere in between, a lot of people just decided to stay home and think about themselves and their needs. And it requires being active and completely informed and active in what's going on. This is a real opportunity. My friends and I feel that we're getting with our grandchildren, and between the two sets of ages, this is where real activism can come in. And we're teaching them how to get things done on the picket line, how to get things done, you name it, in affecting change. I've been an ancient League of Women Voters member forever and ever. A lot of it is education and activism. Next slide. Let's talk about individual things really affecting the economy and the markets. I'm from the Midwest, all over the Midwest, and we're used to tornadoes, all right? Something new came into the vocabulary. Sister Cheryl and I were talking about derecho. I had no idea what a derecho is until I found out this particular one that was going near Indiana had speeds of 130 miles an hour, and it was 250 miles long. It was a wall of wind. If you could imagine a phalanx of tornadoes moving through in a straight line fashion, it was absolutely astonishing. We used to see these maybe almost nowhere else in the world. They've had one or two over in Europe. We got maybe one or two that occurred here in the United States. We're going to be seeing more of these derechos here, and they are the most devastating winds you could possibly imagine coming through. Trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars of damage are anticipated to be caused by these kinds of winds. And here's the big problem here. It's because of extremes in weather patterns. You've had a meteorologist talk to you before. What we're seeing is a change in the pattern of the trade winds. The Earth's entire atmosphere is seeing dramatic changes in the flow of wind. And the huge problem causing all this is the polar caps are melting. And that warming is causing extremes and further extremes happening. So this is something else that we're going to have to be dealing with on a regular basis here. It's going to be increasing density and intensity both of natural disasters. We're going to be looking at average temperatures here that are actually pretty stable, but that's because you're looking at average. What it doesn't consider are the extremes. Next picture. And you can't have a lecture without having a chart, right? So here's the key thing that we're looking at here. We have the average that we had before with the previous climate. Actually, there were not too many big extremes between hot weather and the cold weather side. We had seasons and normal seasons, and everybody knew what to expect on it. What we're now seeing is an entire shift over to the right here, where the average temperature is actually going higher and moving over to the right, where you're going to have more hot weather and the record super hot weather. In other words, deserts are going to return to the United States. Take a look at the West Coast, which has always been, quote, an arid area. We're going through the process of desertification now. Right now, the only thing stopping are the Rockies, but that's going to be a huge problem. The drawdown of water supply, the Ogallala Aquifer, all through the Great Plains, is another huge problem as well, and it's not being replenished. So you're going to be seeing a drawdown in those areas. You get to the one place in the United States where you have lots of water, we're here, and that's the Mississippi Valley. You know, we're very fortunate in having a lot of water. The unfortunate thing is we're going to be seeing a more 500-year, 1,000-year floods, because that's what happens when you've got the water, and extremes in weather are more floods. So floods are going to become a huge situation. Coastal flooding, almost a given. You know, if you have beachfront property, this is an excellent year to sell it. There's always somebody out there who might want to buy it. But moving away is a really critical thing at this point in time, because coastal flooding is going to continue to be a huge problem for the environment. So what we're going to be looking at is a lot of damage to the Earth's atmosphere. Next slide. And this is the reason why. We knew it was coming and did nothing about it. We've had many opportunities over the years to cut back on things. Let me specifically talk about in my industry alone. The deadliest gas that happens to be out there is methane. It's not carbon dioxide, it's methane.
Mm-hmm.
Methane is highly toxic. We know that it's carcinogenic. All over the state of Oklahoma, you have a huge number of gas pipelines, most of which leak. And the methane comes up from the leaks in the ground. You can smell it when you're driving across Oklahoma. It could be avoided if all they did was maintain it. When you talk about leaks from oil and gas, the Alaska natural gas pipeline and the Alaska oil lines, large leaks have gone with everything coming into the tundra causing permanent damage. It's failure to do proper maintenance. Companies are absolutely loath to do maintenance because it's not profitable. They only do maintenance when they're forced to do it. And that's the huge problem they have right now, is that with the complete revision of all the EPA regulations, we've had 125 regulations absolutely squashed, which thank God will be reversed within the first month that Biden's in there, but permitting all the oil and gas companies basically to postpone maintenance and not do the necessary work that has to be done to stop methane escaping. From natural gas drilling, that's not the only source of methane. The cows, the cattle, livestock have a huge amount of methane. And because we have such a beef and meat society, we have a huge number of cows out there, and this is a huge problem. A number of places, well, not a number, a few places have actually been very successful in putting next to feedlots and feedstocks, methane capture by taking cow poop and processing it, and they can actually provide electricity to large sections of the city, just because of the amount of methane that comes in off of cattle. Wherever you have a compost pile, you have methane. One of the most dangerous things, though, is methane is very heavily in the decomposing vegetation in the tundra in Alaska and all through the north. If that tundra is penetrated, the methane is released and causes even more damage. Carbon capture is one thing, but methane is even more important, and that's something we can do about it right now, and that's mandatory maintenance. How do you get companies to change their minds about doing maintenance? Well, nothing focuses the attention quite so much as looking down the barrel of a gun, and that's exactly what you do. What they have to do is to have a huge economic cost incurred if they do not do the maintenance. You change the whole process of how they account for it. If there are any accountants in the group here, it's do you capitalize or do you expense it? If you expense it, you write it off right now, which is good. It lowers your tax rate. But there's a problem with that. Wouldn't you want to lower your taxes on it and do the right thing? Sure. Except if you lower the profitability of a company in a quarter because you were doing high maintenance, the earnings went down. Oh, wait, the CEO's bonuses and top management are tied to good earnings. Heaven forfend that should happen. So what do? They defer everything, goose the value of the stock until their stock options are exercised. They pull their money out and then let the next guy do the maintenance. And sometimes the maintenance gets deferred so long that you end up with a huge having to rip it up and do it all over again. So this is the problem with our accounting structure and with our legal structure. You have to have the economic disincentives to do right. Will corporations do right on their own? No, no. For the last 30 years, business schools have been taught and have been teaching it is the responsibility of corporations to return to shareholders, maximize return to shareholders. That is sheer idiocy. And whoever came up with that, I just started seeing it when I was in graduate school, and that was a gazillion years ago. Responsibility to shareholders. Wait a minute. What about everybody else? The customers, the employees, the nation in which you live. Everybody is a stakeholder. So it should have been responsibility is to stakeholders, not to shareholders. Companies still are not changing their opinion on this for one major reason. It's their compensation. The compensation of going to top management is still preposterous. The average CEO around the world makes approximately 80 times what the average employee makes, except in the United States. The average CEO in the United States is now making approximately 400% more than the average worker. We are the most overpaid, preposterously overpaid country in the world. And that's why their attention is focused not on doing the necessary maintenance because they're gunning for short-term profits. So we have to change the incentives, and that can be done now. That can be done now. And it's just putting the regs in that refocus the attention there. Next slide. Just another example as to which tub you're in. We have a warmer climate. It's not going to bother the top 10% because they will be profiting off of it. It's definitely going to cook everybody else. So I just threw that in there so you could see the economic disparity and what a catastrophe this does into normal what used to be a normal democracy where we had a large middle class. This is what's disappearing now in the United States. We do not have a large middle class anymore. What we're basically looking at is a complete diversion where we have a large number of very poor people and very rich people. The top 10% of the rich people here in the United States own over 30% of all the assets. The top 1% own 25% of all the assets, the billionaires, kabillionaires. So when you have that kind of concentration, what do you look like? Oh, good Lord, you know, you're looking like India, China, places where you have the ultra rich and everybody else is still struggling and making money to make any kind of money for a living wage. When you get that kind of economic disparity, social unrest follows for a very good reason. You cannot have that situation continue for long. This is something we're going to be dealing with. Next one. So bottom line is, what are we going to do about it? We've had a Democratic Party and a Republican Party with extremes on both sides, and it's been years since we've had a civil discussion for anything. Honestly, the last time I can think of people even reaching across the aisle and working together was George Bush the First, where it was actually still a civil situation back then. Even a little bit under the Clinton administration, they used to be able to work together. But it came with Newt Gingrich when he started throwing Newtonian bombs on everybody, that we saw this huge disparity between the two, and there would be no compromise. It was all going to be defeat, my side or your side. And that's, we just simply do not have the ability to compromise at any level at all. So what we're looking at, do we have any hope here for it? And my concern is that until we get some kind of resolution with or change in structure in our party system, we absolutely can't. My opinion is that it's irretrievably broken. We have to really examine the two-party system and how we govern in the United States, because this is not working. When you have two separate parties here or people who are running for any kind of political office, what do? When the new congressman first arrives in Washington, D.C., before they can even figure out where the bathrooms are, they're fundraising. They've been assigned how much money they have to raise immediately. When you have 2 years in office, which is the House of Representatives, all you do is fundraise. If you went there idealistically thinking that you were going to make some changes, nah, not a shot. I think what has to be restructured is you're in there for a longer period of time. And several people people who teach government, it seems reasonable to make the senators an 8-year term and make the House a 6-year term with no more than 2 re-ups. So you'd have a senator in for 16 years and a House of Representatives for 12 years with term limits. But that way they don't start fundraising as soon as they land there. There just might possibly be people working for the good of the country, which right now neither is doing. They're working for the good of the lobbyists, and the lobbyists are getting everything they want. Everything is completely done as the corporations want. So until we get this restructuring, what does it take? Campaign finance reform. Right now we have all the money going exactly where the corporations are paying. Until we get campaign finance reform, we're not going to make any headway on this all, because everything follows the money, and that's the key thing. And our last one. Here's Snoopy. Even the darkest night, there's hope. Moonlights our path, so does hope light our way. Now here's my blue sky hope for things. And this is really kind of a strange deal, but I do have it. We've got 3 old goats running the government. We're going to have the world's oldest president. We have a very old and ancient head of the House, head of the Senate. These 3 people have worked together successfully in the past. They were on good terms at one particular period in time. In fact, Joe Biden's used to be great friends with Mitch McConnell. Mitch was the only one who went to Joe's son's funeral. They used to be good friends. And Nancy got along with everybody back then. Here you have 3 old goats who are not going to be around much longer on this earth, who want to leave a legacy. And this is their opportunity to leave a legacy. And that shocking legacy would be working together on common problems. The biggest problem we are facing right now is COVID, number 1. We have to get that at least under control. The second one, though, is going to be the environment. We know the catastrophes that are facing us now. It is irreversible, but we can stop it from getting worse. And if we can stop it from getting worse within the next 10 years, we stand a chance of keeping this planet livable. But we are headed for such extremes in climate that we could make this planet uninhabitable. And that is going to be desertification and having wild flooding. It's going to go back, the old seminars you used to see on TV, talking about how the earth got here. We're going to go back to those kinds of levels with just absolute economic annihilation going through. And it didn't even take nuclear war to do it. We did it to ourselves, and that's the worst way. So at this point, let me open it up for questions. There are things we can do. I'm not totally negative on it, but we don't have a good track record to date.
We have one question in the chat, and I'll just read that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we need to use nuclear power along with renewables to achieve the needed reduction in the carbon emissions?
Yes, we do. I've been very pro-nuclear power all the way along. We do have problems. What do you do with the waste? We cannot have good nuclear power until we have a suitable waste disposal. We have never solved that problem, and we can. And it doesn't mean putting it in cans in some desert. That is not the way you do it. Reprocessing is what they should have been attempting to some time ago. Now, looking back in history, if you go into Idaho, the original nuclear electric power plant is still running. They reprocess all their waste and they're running on and independently by themselves. It's a very small plant. It still exists. Why doesn't everybody keep doing it this way? For one major reason. The people who mined uranium said, we're not going to sell enough uranium that way. You've got to have it, use it, and get rid of it. And that's why we have a problem with disposal. It can be reprocessed, pre-processed, and used. And they have done it successfully. And that very small plant is still running in Idaho. It's the same way with virtually everything. You can reprocess so much of it. Solar does make sense. Alternative energy makes sense. But the only time we are able to develop that is when the cost of oil and gas gets so high that alternatives make sense. We love cheap gasoline. Oh, cheap oil, cheap everything. What we have to do is raise the cost. My whole argument is the easiest way to do it is to put a gasoline tax, a fuel consumption tax for rebuilding the infrastructure. You know, in the state of Missouri, they should be posting along Highway 70, no swimming, fishing, or water skiing in the potholes. You know, it's catastrophic is what we're coming down to. We have horrible bridges. What is that going to cost us? It means that our highways will not be used for transportation across, alternatives will be used. When you don't have a safe infrastructure, you're going to go elsewhere. Our ports, our ocean ports, river ports, you name it, are so behind the times that you have huge ships and conga lines going out into the ocean trying to get in to unload their goods. Now, some of these things, you know, that when you have a lot of fresh produce and everything, it rots. And you also end up with a cargo that cannot get delivered out. Our rail bed is terrible condition. You constantly see derailings and, you know, oh my gosh, you know, what was the latest thing that spilled all over this town that came out of that's a very efficient transportation way of hauling anything from here to there. The safest way to haul any kind of natural gas, liquid, or oil is by pipeline. That would solve all those problems, except you have to maintain it. And the idiots who own the companies won't maintain it until they have the gun at their heads. So we have to put these economic incentives in there. There are safe ways to drill, relatively safe ways, but safe ways of transportation and getting to the people who need it. You have to raise the cost, and taxes are necessary to do it. There's nothing wrong with a user tax. You use it, you should pay for it, and we all use it.
Another one about the nuclear. How can we avoid nuclear disasters such as Fukushima?
Mm-hmm. That is a real tough one because it all completely depends upon people. Why would you put a nuclear power plant in an area prone to both earthquakes and tsunamis? Oh, because you need water, you need cheap water, and that's why they did it. It was just a matter of time before it was going to absolutely get nailed. You know, it was just bad planning, just idiocy in building it. At one point in time, we were going to have a power plant built in Washington State, and remember it was known as Whoops. It finally was shut down because the construction was absolutely pitiful. You know, it was a design that never should have been, and now I think they're growing mushrooms in it or something. I don't know. It's a giant waste of money, but it happens when you don't have good design. And right now, Fukushima never should have existed. The location of it never should have existed. So before you put up any kind of nuclear power plant, it's got to be in a reasonable area. Is it going to be local? Well, if you're going to transmit it, you lose power on a transmission line as you go down. It has to be constantly reduced. So it can't be too far away from the source of people who are going to be using it. So it's a tough thing on deciding where you put it. Now, there are plans out there for small reactors. In other words, small power plants, not these giant ones everywhere. That's showing some real promise. And, you know, if you have a different kind of a stable power supply there. The key thing is security for these things. You know, is this something that could be easily rated? Well, you can fix that if you put enough money into it. Right now, the weakest link that we have in the United States are our power lines. We have no protection for any of them. You know, we're all hugely vulnerable to a power shutdown here in the United States. There's no protection for any of it. So keep your fingers crossed. That's about all you can do at this point because we have nothing that prevents anything.
Here are two questions that are related. Give us some positive and reasonable ways to cope with climate change, and what can consumers do that they aren't doing now to help our climate?
Positive things for change is basically passing legislation, taxing usage, because when you have the money, the tax money in it, you can start fixing the roads, the infrastructure, and that means you use less energy when you do that. You develop the rail bed, that's less energy, you know, that you could, because if you can put a railroad in rather than highways, it's much more efficient and it's safer. And the same way with barges, boats, you name it, the cheaper way of any kind of infrastructure rebuilding. So vote for taxes and push for taxes that we can rebuild the infrastructure. What can individuals do? It's, it's almost embarrassingly simple. Stop using. We waste too much. 40% of our food is wasted here in the United States. We're overproducing as an agricultural country. If it isn't perfect, we throw it out. We don't have gleaners in the fields anymore to rush through and pick things out. You know, we found out recently that with all the restaurants shutting down, they were killing calves, dumping milk in the streets, dumping milk everywhere. Things that was just absolutely appalling. Well, that's what happened during the Great Depression as well. When there's no market for it, you have to dump it, kill it, whatever it is. So we saw what happened. We have been producing way too much here in the United States. And we're finding out now that we're home, shut down, do you really need all of that? Now, I do have to disclose, I drive a 2005 PT Cruiser. I don't use a lot of energy. But you really have to just stop using and stop using so much. That's what individuals can do.
Here's one that says, what about the migration of peoples and economies and climate change?
Migration actually gives you growth. You know, when people are free to move around to where the jobs are, that's what's always given us a huge amount of growth. That's come to a screeching halt because we have a huge problem with affordable housing everywhere in the United States except the undesirable areas. We have very limited migration now. Now, this is one positive thing that's going to come from technology, and that's you can stay put and still have a very good job, which in itself will cause areas like Iowa City, Iowa to grow. You know, if you can be a tech center right there in the middle of Iowa City. So that's a positive thing. But migration is unfortunately going to be very limited simply because they're of affordable housing. We have a affordable housing shortage here in the United States. Even in the city of St. Louis, if you were to build a new housing development, people would be rushing all over the place. A home that cost under $250,000, there's a big demand for it. Unfortunately, developers don't want to do that. They still view putting up the McMansion out there in Lottie-Doo or West County or West Bejesus. I don't even know what's all that way out there. But they keep building that kind of stuff, and then it sits there and it sits there. I'm looking at Clayton right now, and they're putting up 4 new high-rises that they call multi-use. For some reason, they seem to think that everybody from out west, now that they don't have children at home, are all going to move into Clayton, right? And all go out to dinner every single night. You know, who are these people? Somebody's forgotten to do a study in it, but that's what happens with real estate. They have boom-bust cycles, not good planners. Thank God they're not doing nuclear power plants.
Here's one that says, if industry profits depend on increased energy consumption, and a lot of our solutions are about finding new ways to consume,
right,
or even marketing new ways to consume, how can we find the political will to build an energy infrastructure that uses less energy instead of more?
That requires visionary management. And it's kind of interesting. There's an old guide, because I've known these oil and gas guys for years and years and years, okay? And more is always better, consuming tons of it. Don't worry, it'll be fine. It'll all take care of itself. Science will figure this all out. And of course, it hasn't. The old goats will still go to maximum production. And because we have very, very low pricing right now, they're going bankrupt. Energy companies are going bankrupt hand over fist. Exxon, the largest country in the United States, 10 years ago, has been taken out of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It is shrinking. They're going to be cutting their dividend in all likelihood. They're at a half-off sale from where they were just 18 months ago. Exxon. And there are people who say, oh, this is your cornerstone stock. Big, huge dividends. Okay, big, huge dividends. Oh, but you've lost half your investment. Such a deal. That focuses the attention wonderfully. Now, who's changing? There are companies out there who are actually changing and developing alternative energy and have been very quietly, because they didn't want to be not in the cool kids corner at the American Petroleum Association meetings, alternative energy things and investing in it. One of them is Chevron. And so there are companies out there. British Petroleum, I hate the company. You know, they have systemically corrupt management. These are the people who blow up chemical companies that brought you Macondo in the Gulf, who have a twin one that was just as bad as the Macondo and could blow at any time, but they've shut it down to do some re-engineering. They have always been turbo, forget about it, just go until it blows up, because lives are just a cost of doing business. Destroyed property is a cost of doing business. As long as the cost of doing business is lower than the money we're making, that's wonderful. The only thing that's good for these people, those be thrown out into their ears. I personally think there's other things we'd like to do to them, but for them to lose all their money would be a very good start for this. But British Petroleum has actually been developing new systems and are really working on solar, which I think is pretty amazing for British Petroleum to be doing it. So a few oil companies are doing the right thing, and they're calling themselves now energy companies as opposed to oil and gas. Now, somebody who should die immediately are the coal companies. By the way, Peabody just very well may again, but when it comes to energy, coal is obsolete for us. China has nothing but coal properties out there, and they're one of the major polluters right now because they burn this very soft coal. They even import coal from us. So that's why their coal companies are still producing. So coal companies are going to be around for a while, but it is an industry that is dying as it should. So we're going from, and everybody says that gas is clean energy. Not really. It's just cleaner than coal. It's cleaner than oil, you know, but we're getting to the point where the economic incentives are there to develop new energy sources. But there was a famous management expert, Peter Drucker, who said, the social responsibility of business is no more or less than society expects at any point in time. If we demand it and we expect it as the electorate, we'll get it. But it has to come from us, because the companies will not do it of their own accord.
Here's one that asks, what about wind power?
Wind power has its place, but it's variable. Until we get better batteries, and a lot of battery development is going on, that variability is very difficult. So you can drive across Illinois and you see large banks going at 55, going whizzing around and around, until you get to a summer day where it's totally doldrums and it's not moving at all. So variable power is what it is. They put a lot of wind also out, windmills out into the ocean, and that seems to be more successful. And laying the lines beneath the ocean seems to work pretty well. There is an environmental problem with that, though. It's a bird chopper. Trump was right. It is a bird chopper. You know, you talk to anybody in the Audubon Society, and cats kill more the birds than the windmills do, but the windmills are right up there. So it can be redesigned. There's a barrel windmill that it's not as efficient, but it I've seen a few in Kansas City. But that too could do some good wind generation. I think you could do it with redesign.
Should we recycle aluminum, plastic, and glass?
Absolutely, but when the prices drop so far, the companies can't make any money recycling. So you have to either make it as what happens is consistency. In University City, come hell or high water, we recycle absolutely everything, even though there are times they're losing money on it. But they know that people will not recycle unless you always do it. If you make it in their interest to do it. My daughter lives in Golden, Colorado. Once a month she trucks all of her stuff out and sorts through the glass and puts everything through. That takes a lot of motivation versus mom here, who wheels the dumpster out to the curb. They put one single stream going through. You've got to make it easy for people to do it. And that's political commitment, political will, even when you have periods when the commodities that they are producing from this are not priced well. And when does that happen? Oh, during a recession. So they've got the 1-2 kick in the shins. The product that they're making has no demand, and they lose money and people go under. You have to make a political commitment.
Here's one that says, how is the price of gas determined?
That's a good one. Does anybody remember the gasoline wars where you would drive down and you'd have two guys across the street fighting each other? Well, they finally found out that that's really good for death. And so you never see gasoline wars anymore. But if you drive around town, and I would recommend everybody get this little app on your phone, it's called Gas Buddy, that tells you where in the part of town the price of gasoline is the cheapest. And it really is supply demand, the same place it comes over from Woodward River. Everybody fills up there, trundles over here and fills up. And it just depends on what the supply and demand is. So certain areas of the city, in South St. Louis, there's one area that just for some unknown reason has just the cheapest gas, unbelievable. And then you start driving down Manchester, where there are tons of gas stations, and they're all quite high priced because they can get away with it. It's what the traffic will bear, what is convenient. Now, how is it priced back at the pump though? That's where it is at the retail side, and that really is not the biggest thing. The biggest thing is what is the price of extraction coming from? It's very expensive to get oil and gas from the United States versus Saudi Arabia. You could drill with golf spikes in Saudi Arabia. It's that close to the surface. Here in the United States, you have to do some serious drilling. In fact, if you're drilling offshore, you're going to go down 15,000 feet. That is very, very expensive. So the cost per barrel is significantly higher. But here's the difference. The oil that we take up is not heavy, so it's easier to refine. The stuff that comes out of Saudi Arabia actually is thicker and requires more refining. So the next stage is, what kind of oil is it that is going to the refinery? So there's the cost of drilling and lifting it out, the cost of moving it to the refinery, the cost of transportation, and then finally getting it into your gas tank. All those costs are added on. Oh yeah, let's throw some tax in on top of that. Which is why everybody in Illinois comes over here, because our gas taxes are ridiculously low. But, and you know, Illinois has better highways than we do too. But anyway, what it really comes down to, that's what the basic cost per barrel is. The cost per barrel, the transportation and the refining costs and the distribution costs, and then the profit margin that the distributor will put on top of that.
Next one, a recently released documentary, Kiss the Ground, discusses the ability of healthy soils' ability to capture carbon created through permaculture, composting, free-range cattle. Would you agree that significant carbon can be absorbed by healthy soil?
Sure, but where is it? You know, we've had bad farming processes for years where they don't rotate crops frequently. During the winter, very few farmers will plant cover crops, which would keep erosion down to a minimum and would also anchor nitrogen in the soil instead of letting it leach through into the water table. And that's a huge problem that we have in Illinois and Iowa, is the nitrogen that they dump as fertilizer on there goes through to the water table. The water in Illinois is toxic. You go around certain small towns in southern Illinois, you can't drink it. You know, you can hold it up to the light and it's terrible. Everybody drinks bottled water. That's because of intrusion from chemicals. It's fertilizer and also from insecticides. So, you know, the biggest problem they're facing right now is, that's wonderful if we had those kinds of fields, but they're not doing it. You know, they're maximizing better living through chemistry and dumping stuff on it as opposed to enriching and remediating the soil. The only place you see people doing that is organic farming. And that's expensive. You don't have cheap food from organic farms. Of course it's better for you. But who eats organic food? People who can afford it.
Let's see. Of all the various energy sources, nuclear, wind, gas, electric, which one is most hopeful?
If we were to do things the right way and do it quickly, I would say nuclear, because we can do small plants in areas and they're capable of producing a tremendous amount of power. And it has minimal effect on the environment. There are no emissions, no emissions. Everything else has consequences. You know, solar, of course, has no problem with emissions there, but on the other hand, when it's dark, you don't have any power. Same way with wind. A lot of those things, the lack of steady power is the huge problem that we have. For consistent power and relatively cheap power, once we get the technology for these mini plants, I think that will be the best way to go. But
So
there are huge hurdles there.
So a follow-up to that is, would you recommend adding solar panels to your house at this time?
The cost is coming down. I've looked at it a number of times. You know, when we had marvelous tax credit from the government, it still didn't quite warrant it. Here in St. Louis, we're not a super solar town, but we have enough clouds. So we're right at the edge. Chicago, it's a waste of time. It's cloudy there most of the time. So you have to be in the right part of the United States to have really efficient use of solar. Arizona, oh my gosh, the whole dadgum state's going solar, you know, as they should. So any place that Colorado, you'll see solar absolutely everywhere. The payback is very quick. They also have high electric rates, and that's another good incentive to installing solar. Nothing focuses the attention more than having a ridiculously expensive alternative.
So somebody asked, would you anticipate returning to the original solar tax credits?
Honestly, why not? It accelerated it, you know. If you want to change behaviors, change the tax law. I don't mind using tax law to promote good behavior. It's been promoting bad behavior for years as they get around and, you know, just manipulate the system to their advantage. And those loopholes, by the way, weren't done by stupid people. They were done by lobbyists. They got them in there. Accountants are smart people. They know what happens. What if? But those loopholes all benefited particular industries. So yeah, I would be very much in favor of it. Change behavior by making in the tax law.
Another one. Seems we also need to require no homes on rivers. Insurance costs should not be paid by the public taxpayer when people's homes are flooded.
Hear, hear. Absolutely. Absolutely. If you want to live on sand, you start building your boat, man, because you're going to be floating. You know, any place, if you want to risk in a high risk area, it's your choice. But I don't want to pay for it either from having emergency aid from you because you were flooded out. Oh no. And look what Valmeyer did. Valmeyer, the whole city got flooded out when the Mississippi flooded. What did Valmeyer do? They moved the town.
Yeah.
That was so smart. That's what should be required. If due to extreme weather, which we're in now, and it's going to get even worse, your town is no longer viable, let's start thinking about moving the conga line inward. You've got to change. As a taxpayer and as an insurance payer, I don't want to pay for it.
We have no other questions in the chat. Does anybody wish to ask another question?
Unmute your phone.
Thank you.
Well, I don't see that anybody else wants to ask anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate you, Julie. I give you a big clap of hands.
And I thank you.
Very nice, very nice.
We do really appreciate you had the time, and we know you have the knowledge. So thank you very much for enlightening us. And I'm sure everybody, I see some thumbs up and some hand claps, little signs. So we just thank you very much that you took the time to enlighten us on the topic of climate change and the economy and everything else that you put in there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, good night, everybody.
Good
Oh, wait a
night.
minute, I do have one other little, let me pull this back up here.
Thank you so much.
Our next event in our Franciscans for Earth series is the film, The Biggest Little Farm. It will be on January 12th, 2021. It will be via Zoom. Everybody will watch it at the same time, and then we'll have a chance for some discussion afterwards. So January 12th, the film, The Biggest Little Farm. So again, we thank everybody for attending, and we hope you have a very good evening.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Sister Cheryl, can you hang on?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, we can talk. Larry and Barbara may have forgotten.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.